The dining hall of Pemberton House fell silent. Every fork suspended midair. Every whispered conversation died on painted lips. Every eye in that glittering room turned toward the same extraordinary sight. Lady Seren Whitmore, the quiet nobody in the faded lavender gown, seated directly beside Theron Vane, the Duke of Ravenmore. The man London called the Spectre. The man whose very name made debutantes clutch their mother's arms. The man who had killed before and, according to the whispers, would certainly kill again. And she was sitting beside him, close enough to touch, close enough to see the scar that carved through his left eyebrow and disappeared into his hairline, close enough to notice that his knuckles had gone white around his wineglass. At the far end of the room, Lady Lavinia Ashford watched with her circle of admirers, barely containing their anticipation. This was their entertainment for the evening, their cruel little game. They expected tears. They expected Seren to flee in terror. They expected the Spectre to destroy her with a single glacial glance, as he had done to so many others who dared approach uninvited. What they didn't expect was what happened next. The Duke of Ravenmore set down his glass with deliberate precision. He turned, not toward the trembling woman beside him, but toward the cluster of silk-clad vipers who had sent her. His gaze found Lady Lavinia across the crowded room, and he smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just identified exactly which throat he intended to tear out first. Lady Lavinia's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the marble floor. But to understand how Seren Whitmore came to be seated beside the most dangerous man in England, we must return to where this evening truly began. 3 hours earlier, when she had arrived at Pemberton House, with absolutely no intention of speaking to anyone at all, Lady Seren Whitmore had developed a talent for disappearing in plain sight. It was, she reflected, perhaps the only useful skill she had acquired in her 24 years of existence. Certainly more practical than watercolors, or needlework, or any of the other accomplishments young ladies were supposed to cultivate. None of those would help her survive an evening like this one. Pemberton House blazed with the light of 1,000 candles, their flames dancing in crystal chandeliers that cost more than her family's entire annual income. The cream of London society had gathered for the Countess of Pemberton's spring dinner, a tradition that stretched back 3 generations and served primarily as an opportunity for the aristocracy to evaluate one another's gowns, jewels, and marriage prospects. Seren possessed none of these in any impressive quantity. Her gown was lavender silk, pretty enough if one did not examine it too closely. The fabric had been turned twice to hide the worn sections, and the lace at her sleeves was mended in 3 places. Her only jewelry was a simple gold locket containing miniature portraits of her parents, painted when they were young and hopeful, and still believed the Whitmore name meant something. She had positioned herself in her usual spot, a small alcove near the towering windows that overlooked the garden. From here, she could observe the glittering proceedings without being drawn into them. She could fulfill her social obligations by appearing without actually participating, and most importantly, she could count the minutes until it was acceptable to leave. Seren, darling, do try to look less like you're attending a funeral. Her mother's voice reached her through the crowd, and Seren turned to find Lady Marjorie Whitmore approaching with the determined cheerfulness that had become her permanent expression over the past several years. Once considered one of the great beauties of her generation, Marjorie still held herself with the grace of her youth, even as worry had etched permanent lines around her eyes. I'm smiling, Mother. You're grimacing. There's a distinction. Marjorie adjusted a strand of Serene's dark auburn hair, tucking it more securely into her modest arrangement. The Viscount Hartley is here this evening, unmarried, wealthy, only 43 years old. Only 43, Seren repeated flatly. Beggars cannot be choosers, my love. The words were delivered gently, but they struck like stones nonetheless. Because Marjorie was right. After what her father had done, after the scandal that had consumed their family 5 years ago, beggars were precisely what the Whitmores had become. Sir Edmund Whitmore had been a respected man once, a baronet with a modest but comfortable estate, a loving wife, a daughter who had shown promise in her first season. Then he had trusted the wrong business partner, invested the family fortune in a shipping venture that proved to be an elaborate fraud, and lost everything. Not just the money, the investments, the properties, the reputation. When the truth emerged, when the newspapers printed stories about the gullible baronet who had been swindled out of his entire inheritance, society had closed its doors firmly in their faces. Now they survived on the charity of distant relatives, occupying a cramped townhouse on Merton Lane, maintaining the appearance of gentility while their circumstances crumbled around them. Seren's dowry had evaporated years ago. Her marriage prospects had evaporated with it. I'm not going to throw myself at Viscount Hartley, Mother. I'm not asking you to throw yourself. I'm asking you to smile in his general direction. Perhaps make eye contact. Indicate that you are a living, breathing woman who might theoretically be interested in matrimony. I'll take it under consideration. Marjorie sighed, recognizing defeat. At least try to enjoy yourself, darling. We paid 3 shillings for this evening's carriage hire. We might as well get something from it. After her mother departed to make conversation with the few matrons who still acknowledged their existence, Seren retreated further into her alcove, wishing desperately for a book or a strategic potted plant, or literally anything to shield her from the evening ahead. She watched the other guests milling about the drawing room, observed the elaborate rituals of social engagement that had once been second nature to her. Young ladies fluttered their fans at eligible gentlemen. Mothers positioned their daughters advantageously. Fortunes and futures were being negotiated beneath the chandeliers, wrapped in small talk and subtle glances. None of it included her. She was a ghost in lavender silk, visible but unseen, present but unacknowledged. 5 years ago, she would have been in the center of that crowd, laughing and dancing and believing her future held endless possibility. Now she stood at the edges, watching others live the life that had been stolen from her. Well, if it isn't little Seren Whitmore. The voice came from directly behind her, and Seren's stomach dropped even before she turned around. Lady Lavinia Ashford stood there with 2 of her closest companions, Lady Honoria Blackwell and Miss Perpetua Crane. They were resplendent in matching shades of rose and gold, dripping with diamonds that winked maliciously in the candlelight. Their smiles were the kind that preceded torture. Lavinia, Seren said cautiously. What a pleasure. Is it? Lavinia tilted her head, her golden ringlets bouncing with calculated charm. I wouldn't know. I so rarely experience pleasure in your company. One would have to actually notice you first. Honoria and Perpetua giggled, right on cue. Seren said nothing. She had learned years ago that engaging with Lavinia only provided more ammunition. Better to remain silent, weather the storm, and escape as quickly as possible. But tonight, apparently, Lavinia had other plans. I've been watching you all evening, skulking in your little corner, Lavinia continued. It's rather pathetic, really, like a mouse hoping the cats won't notice her. I prefer to think of it as appreciating the architecture. How droll, still pretending you have wit. Lavinia's eyes raked over Seren's gown with undisguised contempt. That dress. I believe I remember it from 3 seasons ago, perhaps 4. Has the lace always been quite so yellow? Time does affect all things, Seren said evenly. Fabric, beauty, character. A dangerous glint appeared in Lavinia's eyes, not quite anger. something more calculated. Careful, little mouse. You forget your place. You're not in a position to be clever anymore. Not since your father proved to all of London that the Whitmore family has more ambition than sense. The barb landed exactly where it was intended. Serene felt the familiar flush of shame creeping up her neck, the hot prickle of humiliation that had become her constant companion since the scandal. "If you'll excuse me," she said in a low voice, "I believe dinner will be announced soon." "Yes, it will." Lavinia's smile widened, and Serene recognized the expression immediately. It was the look of a cat who had just spotted a particularly entertaining mouse. "In fact, that's precisely what I wanted to discuss with you." Serene knew, with the certainty of long experience, that whatever Lavinia wanted to discuss would not be pleasant. "I'm not certain we have anything to discuss," she said, already calculating the fastest route of escape. Through the crowd, past the refreshment table, into the relative safety of the ladies' retiring room. "Oh, but we do." Lavinia stepped closer, her perfume cloying and expensive. "You see, my friends and I have been dreadfully bored this evening. The conversation is tedious, the gentlemen are uninspiring, and I find myself in need of entertainment. I'm sure the musicians would be happy to accommodate you." "Not that kind of entertainment." Lavinia's smile grew sharper. "I have a proposition for you, Serene. A little game, if you will." "I don't play games. You'll play this one, because if you don't, I'll be forced to share some rather interesting information with Lady Pemberton about your family's current living situation. The cramped townhouse on Merton Lane, the mounting debts, the fact that your father has been seen entering moneylenders' establishments at all hours." Serene's blood turned to ice. It was all true, of course, every shameful word of it, but spoken aloud, broadcast throughout society, it would destroy what little remained of her family's dignity. Her mother would be devastated. Her father, already broken by guilt and failure, might not survive the fresh humiliation. "What do you want?" The words came out hoarse. Lavinia exchanged gleeful glances with Honoria and Perpetua. "Nothing too difficult. A simple task. A dare, really. The sort of thing girls do at house parties." "I'm not a girl, and this isn't a house party." "No, it's much more interesting than that." Lavinia nodded toward the far corner of the drawing room, and Serene followed her gaze despite herself. Her stomach plummeted. Standing alone near the fireplace, separated from the rest of the guests by what appeared to be an invisible barrier of pure dread, was a man she had seen only twice before in her life. Both times from a considerable distance. Both times with the fervent hope that the distance would remain considerable forever. The Ron Vane, the Duke of Ravenmore. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in severe black evening clothes that made him look like a shadow given human form. His dark hair was unfashionably long, brushing his collar, and even from across the room, Serene could see the scar that marked his face, a pale slash that ran from his left eyebrow up into his hairline. But it wasn't the scar that made him formidable. It was his eyes. Pale gray and absolutely devoid of warmth, scanning the room with the calculating assessment of a predator evaluating prey. No one stood near him. No one spoke to him. The other guests had arranged themselves in unconscious patterns that kept at least 10 feet of distance between themselves and the Duke at all times. "You want me to approach him?" Serene asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Better than that." Lavinia's eyes sparkled with malicious delight. "When dinner is announced, you're going to sit beside him, not just near him, directly beside him, for the entire meal." "That's unthinkable. The seating is arranged in advance. Lady Pemberton has left 2 seats on either side of the Duke unassigned. No one would accept placement near him. You see, she's been quite embarrassed about it." Lavinia shrugged delicately. "You'll simply claim one of those seats, voluntarily, in front of everyone." Serene stared at her. You're asking me to commit social suicide. I'm asking you to provide me with entertainment. There's a difference. No one sits near the Duke of Ravenmore. Seren struggled for words. Everyone says that he killed a man in a duel? Honoria supplied helpfully. Shot him straight through the heart at 20 paces. That his fiancée died under mysterious circumstances, Perpetua added. Some say he pushed her from a balcony. Others say he drove her to throw herself from one. That he hasn't smiled in 10 years? Lavinia finished. That servants refuse to work in his household because they're frightened of him. That he once stared at a man so intensely the poor fellow fainted dead away. Those are rumors, Seren said weakly. Surely. Perhaps they are. Perhaps they aren't. Lavinia leaned closer, her breath hot against Seren's ear. Why don't you find out for us? Sit beside him, make conversation, try not to die of fright. And in the morning, you can tell us all about it. And if I refuse? Then tomorrow, all of London will know about your father's debts, his visits to the moneylenders, the fact that your family is one bad month away from the workhouse. Lavinia straightened, smoothing her immaculate gloves. Your choice, little mouse. Face the specter for one evening, or watch your family's last shred of dignity burn to ashes. Seren's mind raced. There had to be another option, a way out, some leverage she could use, some ally she could call upon. But there was no one. Her family had no friends left, no influence, no power, and Lavinia knew it. Time is running short. Lavinia glanced toward the doorway, where servants were beginning to gather in preparation for the dinner announcement. What's your decision? Seren looked across the room at the Duke of Ravenmore. He stood motionless by the fireplace, a dark monument to everything intimidating about aristocratic power. The scar on his face caught the light, a permanent reminder of violence. She thought of her mother, still making brave conversation across the room. Her father, waiting at home, drowning in guilt and debt. The cramped townhouse with its leaking roof and dwindling coal supply. One evening of dread against their complete destruction. It wasn't really a choice at all. Fine. The words left her mouth before she could stop them. I'll do it. Lavinia's smile was triumphant. Excellent. We'll be watching, of course. If you try to claim a different seat, if you don't stay beside him for the entire meal, the deal is void. Understood? Understood. Wonderful. Lavinia patted Seren's cheek with mock affection. Do try not to make him angry, little mouse. I'd hate to lose my entertainment so quickly. She swept away with her companions, leaving Seren alone with her racing pulse and the growing certainty that she had just agreed to something catastrophically stupid. Across the room, as if sensing her attention, the Duke of Ravenmore turned his head. Their gazes locked. For one endless instant, Seren couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't look away from those pale gray eyes that seemed to see straight through her lavender silk and social armor to the woman beneath. Then the dinner announcement rang out across the drawing room, and the crowd began to move. Seren forced her feet to carry her forward, toward the most dangerous man in England, toward whatever awaited her at his side. The dining hall of Pemberton House was a masterwork of aristocratic excess. 3 enormous crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting prismatic light across a mahogany table that could seat 40 guests with room to spare. Silver candelabras marched down the center in precise formation, their flames reflected in polished silverware and cut-glass goblets. The walls were hung with portraits of Pemberton ancestors, all of whom seemed to be watching the proceedings with ancestral disapproval. Seren moved through the crowd like a woman walking to her own execution, which, socially speaking, she was. The other guests flowed around her in pairs and clusters, finding their assigned seats with practiced ease. She heard the rustle of silk, the murmur of polite conversation, the occasional bright peal of laughter. Normal sounds. The sounds of an evening that was proceeding exactly as it should. None of them knew what she was about to do. The Duke of Ravenmore had already taken his seat at the far end of the table. Seren watched heads turn away as guests passed him, saw the practiced dance of bodies maintaining distance. One young woman actually crossed to the opposite side of the room rather than walk within arm's reach of his chair. And on either side of him, like moats around a dark fortress, sat two conspicuously empty chairs. Seren stopped walking. She could still turn back, could claim sudden illness, flee to the retiring room, send her apologies to Lady Pemberton, and escape this madness entirely. Yes, Lavinia would make good on her threats. Yes, her family's remaining reputation would be destroyed. But at least she wouldn't have to sit beside the specter for an entire interminable meal. At least she wouldn't have to feel those pale gray eyes upon her, wondering if the rumors were true, wondering if this would be the night she pushed him too far. "Miss Whitmore!" A footman had appeared at her elbow, his expression professionally neutral. "May I escort you to your seat?" Serene opened her mouth to decline, to explain that she was feeling unwell, to make any excuse that would carry her away from this dining hall and the monster waiting at its far end. But across the room, she caught Lavinia's eye. Lavinia smiled, raised her champagne glass in a mocking toast. Waited. "Yes," Serene heard herself say. "Thank you. I believe I'll be sitting." She swallowed hard. "Down there, near the end." The footman's eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly, but his training held. "Of course, miss. This way." Every step felt like walking through water. The table stretched before her, lined with faces that turned to watch her progress with growing confusion. She was walking in the wrong direction, away from the middle seats, where minor gentry like herself belonged, toward the high end, where only the most distinguished guests were placed, toward him. The whispers began when she was halfway down the table. "Is that the Whitmore girl? What is she doing? Surely she's not going to— Good God, she is." Serene kept her eyes fixed straight ahead. If she looked at them, at their shocked faces and scandalized expressions, she would lose her nerve entirely. The empty chair beside the Duke of Ravenmore loomed before her. Up close, he was even more intimidating than she had imagined. He sat perfectly still, one hand resting on the table, the other holding a glass of wine that he had not yet tasted. The scar on his face was more pronounced in the candlelight, a stark white line against his tanned skin. His jaw was hard, his cheekbones sharp, his expression carved from granite. He did not look up as she approached, did not acknowledge her existence at all. Seren stopped beside the empty chair. Her pulse thundered so loudly she was certain the entire table could hear it. "Excuse me," she said, and was amazed that her voice didn't shake. "Is this seat taken?" For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the Duke of Ravenmore turned his head. Those gray eyes found hers, and Seren felt the full weight of his attention like a physical force. He did not blink, did not speak, simply looked at her with an expression of such complete and utter frost that she nearly stepped backward. "No," he said finally. His voice was deep and rough, as if he was unaccustomed to using it. "It is not." 3 words. That was all. But they contained neither invitation nor welcome. Just a flat statement of fact, delivered with the enthusiasm of a man acknowledging an unpleasant weather condition. Seren sat down anyway. The chair was comfortable. The cushion was soft. These details registered somewhere in the back of her mind, behind the roaring anxiety that consumed everything else. She was sitting beside the Duke of Ravenmore. She was sitting beside the specter. She was almost certainly going to regret this. "Wine, miss." A footman appeared at her elbow, and Seren nearly jumped out of her skin. "Yes, please." "Thank you." The wine splashed into her glass. She seized it and took a gulp that was far too large for propriety, barely tasting the expensive vintage. Beside her, the Duke had returned his attention to his own glass. He had not moved, had not attempted to make conversation, had not done anything at all, except exist in her immediate proximity like a storm cloud waiting to unleash destruction. Around the table, the other guests were settling into their seats, but their conversations had taken on a strange, hushed quality. Seren could feel their eyes on her, could hear the whispered speculations barely contained behind raised napkins and turned heads. At the far end of the room, Lavinia sat with her companions, watching with undisguised glee. The first course arrived, a delicate soup, steaming gently in porcelain bowls painted with pastoral scenes. Seren stared at it without seeing. Her appetite had fled somewhere around the moment she'd agreed to this madness. She should say something. Social convention demanded some attempt at conversation, however minimal. Even with a man rumored to have killed his own fiancée, one could not simply sit in complete silence through an entire meal. "The soup looks lovely," she tried. No response. French, I believe. The style, I mean, of preparation. Nothing. Or perhaps Italian. I'm not entirely certain. Soup is rather difficult to categorize. The Duke of Ravenmore continued to stare at his own untouched bowl, as if she had not spoken at all. Seren took another gulp of wine. This was going to be the longest evening of her life. The second course came and went. Then the third. Seren made increasingly desperate attempts at conversation, commenting on the weather, the music, the portraits on the walls. The Duke responded to precisely none of it. He ate mechanically, without apparent enjoyment or interest. Occasionally, he lifted his wine glass. Mostly, he sat in perfect, terrible silence. And the eyes continued to watch. Seren could feel them, the weight of collective curiosity and horror pressing down upon her from every direction. The whispers had grown louder as the meal progressed. She caught fragments of conversation, pieces of speculation that made her cheeks burn with humiliation. Lost her mind, clearly. The scandal must have affected her more than we thought. Poor thing. She'll be utterly ruined after this. Lavinia was practically glowing with satisfaction. Her entertainment was proving even better than anticipated. Seren reached for her wine glass again and found it empty. How many had she had? 3? 4? Enough that the edges of her fear were beginning to soften slightly, replaced by something that felt almost like resignation. She had failed. Not at the dare itself. She was still sitting beside the Duke, still fulfilling Lavinia's cruel requirements, but at maintaining any shred of dignity in the process. She had babbled about soup. She had been roundly ignored. And tomorrow, everyone in London would know that Seren Whitmore had either lost her sanity or her last remnant of pride. What did it matter anymore? "You haven't eaten." Seren blinked, turned her head. The Duke of Ravenmore was looking at her. Not through her, not past her, but actually at her. Those gray eyes were focused on her face, with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. "What? Your plate." He nodded toward the untouched food before her. "You haven't eaten any of it." It was the first full sentence he had spoken all evening, the first indication that he was aware of her presence as anything more than an inconvenient piece of furniture. "I'm not very hungry," Seren heard herself say. "Neither am I." His gaze found hers. "But that's not why you're not eating." No. You're not eating because you're frightened." The bluntness of it hit her like a splash of water. "I'm not." "You are. Your hands have been trembling since you sat down. You've drunk enough wine to fell a footman. And you've been making the most painfully awkward conversation I've had the misfortune to endure in years." Seren stared at him. The fear was still there, coiled in her chest, but something else was rising alongside it, something that felt almost like indignation. If my conversation was so painful, you might have helped by actually responding to it. One dark eyebrow rose, the one bisected by the scar. I might have. But then, I wouldn't have learned what I needed to know. Which was, why you're here. He leaned slightly closer, and Seren caught the scent of him. Clean linen and something woodsy, like cedar or sandalwood. Not unpleasant. Not what she had expected from a monster. No one sits beside me voluntarily. Not ever. Which means someone sent you. Someone who wanted to watch you suffer for their amusement. Seren's mouth went dry. I don't know what you... Lady Ashford, the Duke continued, as if she hadn't spoken. Golden hair. Rose-colored gown. Currently seated at the far end of the room with her sycophants, watching us like we're actors in a particularly entertaining tragedy. He knew. He had noticed. He had been paying attention this entire time, cataloging every detail while she'd thought he was ignoring her completely. How did you? She's not subtle. None of them are. His voice had turned glacial, though she wouldn't have thought that achievable. I recognized the pattern immediately. Privileged girl with too much power and not enough sense, using someone weaker as a toy. I had no choice, she said softly. She threatened my family, our reputation, what little we have left. So you sacrificed yourself instead. It seemed like the better option at the time. Did it? Those gray eyes were unreadable. And now? Now that you've spent an hour sitting beside the specter, being ignored and pitied and talked about, does it still seem like the better option? Seren considered lying, considered maintaining some shred of dignity by pretending that everything was fine, that she was handling the situation with grace. But what was the point? No, she admitted. Now I'm fairly certain I've just made everything worse. A crack appeared in his granite composure, not quite a softening, more like the faintest fracture in an otherwise impenetrable wall. Perhaps, he said, or perhaps not. Before Seren could ask what he meant, the Duke set down his napkin and pushed back his chair. Every eye in the room swung toward him. He rose to his full height, which was considerable, and stood briefly looking down at Seren with that unreadable gaze. Then, slowly and deliberately, he extended his hand. Dance with me. The words hung in the air. Around the table, Seren heard gasps, saw mouths falling open, watched Lady Pemberton clutch her pearls as if witnessing something beyond comprehension. Because it was beyond comprehension. The Duke of Ravenmore did not dance. Everyone knew that. He had not danced at a social function in nearly a decade, had refused every invitation, declined every request, rebuffed every hopeful young lady who had dared approach him. And now he was asking her. I don't... Serene's voice came out as barely a whisper. I'm not sure. Neither am I. A hint of dark humor glinted in his eyes. But it seems we're both doing unexpected things this evening. Why stop now? His hand remained extended, waiting. At the far end of the room, Lavinia's face had gone pale. Serene drew a steadying breath, then another. Then she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and he drew her to her feet. Now, the Duke said, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. Let's give them something to really talk about. And he led her toward the dance floor, while behind them, Lady Lavinia's orchestrated entertainment crumbled into dust. The waltz was a scandal in three-quarter time. Seren had danced before, of course. Years ago, during her single promising season, she had waltzed with nervous young lords and overeager second sons, all of them perfectly pleasant and entirely forgettable. None of those experiences had prepared her for dancing with the Duke of Ravenmore. He moved like a man who had trained for battle rather than ballrooms. There was nothing soft in the way he held her, nothing hesitant in his steps. His hand at her waist was firm, almost possessive. His gray eyes never left her face. Around them, the other guests had cleared the floor entirely. Some stood frozen mid-conversation. Others openly gaped. Lady Pemberton appeared to be on the verge of requiring smelling salts. "Breathe," the Duke said. "You're turning rather an alarming shade of purple." Seren sucked in air. "I'm fine. You're lying, but I appreciate the effort." He guided her through a turn with effortless precision. "They're watching us, you know. Every single one of them." I had noticed. "Good. Let them watch." His expression turned predatory. "Let them see that their little game has backfired spectacularly." Serene's mind was still struggling to process the evening's events. 10 minutes ago, she had been enduring the most excruciating dinner of her life. Now she was waltzing with London's most feared nobleman, while the entire room held its collective breath. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You don't know me. You have no reason to help me." "Don't I?" The Duke's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Lady Ashford and her companions have been a plague upon polite society for years. They target those who cannot defend themselves. They destroy reputations for sport. And they do it all with the protection of their wealth and titles. That doesn't explain why you care. Perhaps I simply enjoy watching bullies receive their comeuppance. Or perhaps you have your own reasons for wanting to humiliate Lavinia Ashford. The Duke's eyes sharpened with what looked almost like respect. Perceptive. I wondered if there was a brain behind those anxious eyes. There is, though I'll admit it's currently functioning at reduced capacity. The music swelled toward its conclusion, and the Duke drew her through a final series of turns. When they came to a stop, Seren was winded, her chest tight from more than just exertion. He did not release her immediately. Instead, he stood holding her hand, his gaze sweeping across the watching crowd with satisfaction. "Tomorrow morning," he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone. 10 o'clock. My residence on Blackwood Square. We have matters to discuss." "What matters?" "The terms of our arrangement." Before she could ask what arrangement he was referring to, the Duke released her hand, offered a formal bow, and walked away without looking back. Seren stood alone on the dance floor, surrounded by whispers and stares, wondering what on earth she had just agreed to. The carriage ride home was a blur of confusion and residual anxiety. Her mother had found her almost immediately after the Duke's departure, face pale with shock and something else, something that looked almost like hope. "Seren Charlotte Whitmore," Marjorie had hissed, gripping her daughter's arm with surprising strength. "What in heaven's name just happened?" "I'm not entirely certain." "You danced with the Duke of Ravenmore. The Duke of Ravenmore. The man hasn't danced in a decade. The man doesn't speak to anyone. The man is rumored to have murdered his own fiancée, and you were waltzing with him as if it were the most natural thing in the world. It wasn't natural. It was overwhelming. And yet you did it anyway." Marjorie's eyes had searched her daughter's face. "Why?" Serene had considered explaining about Lavinia's threats, about the dare, about all of it. But the drawing room was too crowded, the ears too numerous. Some conversations required privacy. "I'll explain at home," she had said. "But Mother, he's asked me to call upon him tomorrow morning." Marjorie's grip had tightened. "The Duke? Has asked you? To his residence?" "Yes." "Seren, this is—" Her mother had stopped, seemingly unable to find words. This could change everything. Now, as their shabby hired carriage rattled through the dark London streets, Seren watched her mother's face in the flickering lamplight and felt the weight of those words pressing down upon her. This could change everything. But change it how? The Duke was a stranger, a dangerous stranger by all accounts. Whatever he wanted from her, It surely couldn't be anything good. And yet, he had rescued her from Lavinia's cruel game. He had danced with her in front of everyone, transforming her from a pathetic victim into something else entirely. The woman who had captured the specter's attention. The woman who had done what no one else could. What did that make her? The carriage stopped before their cramped townhouse on Merton Lane, and Seren's brief fantasy dissolved. The building loomed in the darkness, its facade peeling and its windows dark. They couldn't afford to keep candles burning in unoccupied rooms. Inside, the reality of the Whitmore family's circumstances was even more apparent. The entrance hall, which should have been warm and welcoming, was bare and sparsely furnished. Most of their good pieces had been sold years ago. What remained was mismatched and worn, salvaged from various relatives' attics. "Father's already retired," Marjorie said, removing her cloak. "His headaches have been worse lately." His headaches. The polite euphemism for the black moods that consumed Sir Edmund Whitmore with increasing frequency. He spent most of his days now in his study, staring at ledgers that showed only debt, paralyzed by guilt over the fortune he had lost. And Oswin? Studying, I expect. He has examinations soon. Oswin, her younger brother, 17 years old, and brilliant beyond measure. He had been accepted to Cambridge on scholarship, the one bright spot in their family's dismal situation. But the scholarship covered only tuition. Books, lodging, living expenses, those fell to the family, and they had almost nothing left to give. Seren climbed the narrow staircase to the first floor, pausing outside her brother's door. Light flickered beneath it, and she could hear the scratch of pen on paper. She knocked gently. "Enter." Oswin's room was even smaller than her own, barely large enough for a bed, a desk, and the precarious stacks of books that covered every available surface. He sat hunched over his work, spectacles perched on his nose, his dark auburn hair, so like her own, falling across his forehead. "You're home early," he said without looking up. "I thought the dinner would last longer." It was eventful. Mother's definition of eventful usually means someone wore an unfashionable hat. Oswin finally raised his head, and his expression shifted as he took in her appearance. "You look strange. Did something happen?" Serene leaned against the doorframe. "I danced with the Duke of Ravenmore." Her brother blinked, then blinked again. "I'm sorry. I could have sworn you just said, 'The Duke of Ravenmore, the specter.'" "Yes." Oswin set down his pen with measured precision. "The same Duke of Ravenmore who allegedly killed Lord Hartington in a duel, who supposedly drove Lady Constance to her death, who hasn't been seen at a social function in years without causing at least 3 people to faint from fear. The very same. And you danced with him." "I did." "Voluntarily?" "More or less." Oswin stared at her for several heartbeats. Then he began to laugh, not the polite chuckle of social convention, but genuine, uncontrolled laughter that made him clutch his sides. "It's not funny," Seren protested, though she felt her own lips twitching. "It's hilarious. My sister, the wallflower, the woman who once hid behind a potted palm to avoid conversation with a viscount, has danced with the most feared man in London." Oswin wiped his eyes. How did this even happen? Seren sank onto the edge of his bed and told him everything. The dare, Lavinia's threats, the agonizing dinner, and finally, the unexpected rescue in the form of a waltz. By the time she finished, Oswin's amusement had faded into something more serious. She threatened to expose father's debts? Yes, the moneylenders, the visits, all of it. That vindictive harpy. Her brother's jaw tightened. Does she have proof? She doesn't need proof. Rumors are enough in our world. You know that. Oswin was silent momentarily, his brilliant mind clearly working through the implications. And the Duke? What does he want from you? I don't know. He's asked me to call upon him tomorrow. That's unusual. Everything about this evening has been unusual. True. Oswin leaned back in his chair, studying her with those perceptive eyes that saw far too much. Be cautious, Seren. The Duke may have helped you tonight, but that doesn't mean his intentions are honorable. Men like him, powerful men, dangerous men, they don't do things without reason. I know. Do you? Because you have a tendency to see the best in people, even when evidence suggests otherwise. And you have a tendency to see the worst. One of us is usually right. But Oswin's tone softened. I just don't want to see you hurt. We've lost enough already. Seren reached over and squeezed his hand. I'll be cautious, I promise. Good. He squeezed back. Now go to bed. You have an audience with the Spectre in the morning. You'll need your rest. Sleep did not come easily. Seren lay in her narrow bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. The evening replayed in her mind, in fragments. Lavinia's cruel smile, the Duke's pale gray eyes, the sensation of being held in his arms, turning across the dance floor while all of London watched. What did he want from her? The question circled endlessly, refusing to resolve into anything coherent. He had mentioned an arrangement, terms to be discussed. But what kind of arrangement could exist between a disgraced baronet's daughter and one of the most powerful nobles in England? Perhaps he wanted information about Lavinia. Perhaps he had his own vendetta against her and saw Seren as a useful tool. Perhaps he was simply mad, as some of the rumors suggested. Or perhaps, and this was the thought that kept her awake longest, perhaps he had seen something in her that others had missed. Something worth his time. Something worth his attention. It was a dangerous thought. A foolish thought. The kind of thought that led young women to make terrible decisions based on romantic fantasies that had no basis in reality. Seren pushed it firmly away and willed herself to sleep. But when she finally drifted off, she dreamed of gray eyes and strong hands and the overwhelming sensation of being seen. The Duke of Ravenmore's residence on Blackwood Square was everything Serene had expected and nothing like she had imagined. The house itself was imposing. 4 stories of dark stone and gleaming windows, set back from the street behind wrought iron gates that seemed designed to discourage visitors. The knocker on the front door was shaped like a snarling wolf's head, which Seren felt was perhaps a bit excessive in its messaging. She arrived at precisely 10 o'clock, dressed in her best morning gown, a deep blue muslin that had been fashionable 3 years ago, and was admitted by a butler whose expression suggested he had witnessed many strange things in his time and was no longer capable of surprise. "Lady Seren Whitmore," she announced, hating the slight tremor in her voice. "The Duke is expecting me." "Indeed, my lady?" The butler inclined his head. "Follow me, please." The interior of the house was unexpectedly warm, not in temperature, though fires burned in every grate, but in atmosphere. Seren had expected darkness and gloom, perhaps cobwebs and shadowy corners befitting the Spectre's reputation. Instead, she found rich wood paneling, comfortable furniture, and an impressive collection of artwork that spoke of cultured taste rather than Gothic horror. The butler led her through a series of corridors to a study at the rear of the house. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a private garden, now dormant in early spring, but clearly well-maintained. Bookshelves lined every wall, crammed with volumes in multiple languages. A massive desk dominated one corner, its surface covered with papers and correspondence. And standing by the window, silhouetted against the morning light, was the Duke of Ravenmore. He turned as she entered, and Seren felt the full force of his attention settle upon her once again. In daylight, without the drama of candlelight and ballroom tension, he looked somehow more human. The scar on his face was still prominent, but the harsh lines of his features had softened slightly. He wore no coat, just shirt sleeves and a dark waistcoat, and his hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had been running his hands through it. "Lady Seren." His voice was the same rough rumble she remembered. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for the invitation." She remained standing just inside the doorway, uncertain whether to advance. "Though I confess, I'm still not entirely sure why I'm here." "No?" One dark eyebrow rose. "I thought I was fairly clear last evening." "You mentioned an arrangement. You did not explain what that meant." "No, I didn't." He gestured toward a pair of chairs positioned before the fireplace. "Please, sit. This conversation may take some time." Seren crossed the room and sat, acutely aware of his eyes following her every movement. The Duke took the chair across from her, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to know something. Last night, when Lady Ashford issued her dare, why did you agree? You could have refused. You could have allowed her to spread her rumors and weathered the consequences." "Could I?" Serene met his stare without flinching. "My family's reputation is all we have left. If Lavinia had made good on her threats, we would have been finished. No one would receive us. No one would help us. My brother's scholarship might have been revoked. My mother would have been humiliated. My father—" She broke off, swallowing hard. "My father has barely survived the shame of his past mistakes. Fresh scandal might have destroyed him entirely. So you sacrificed yourself instead. I did what I had to do to protect my family." The Duke was silent for an extended pause, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. She refused to drop her gaze through sheer force of will. "That's what I thought," he said finally. "It's why I've decided to help you." "Help me how?" "By offering you a solution to your problem, a permanent one." He leaned forward slightly. "You need protection from Lady Ashford and her ilk. You need financial security for your family. And you need society to stop treating you as a convenient target. I can provide all of those things." A chill swept through Seren. "In exchange for what?" "In exchange for playing a role, a temporary one, but demanding nonetheless." The Duke's expression remained unreadable. "I want you to pretend to be my fiancé." The words hung in the air between them, inconceivable and absurd. "Your fiancé," Seren repeated slowly. "You want me to pretend to be engaged to the Duke of Ravenmore?" "Yes. The man London calls the Spectre. The man rumored to have killed his fiancée. Also, yes." "Are you mad?" Amusement sparked in his eyes, brief, unexpected. "Possibly. But I assure you, my proposal is entirely practical." "Practical?" Serene shook her head in disbelief. "How is any of this practical?" "Allow me to explain." The Duke rose and moved to the window, his back to her. "For the past decade, I have been hounded by matchmaking mothers and ambitious young ladies who see my title and fortune and decide that the rumors about my character are merely obstacles to be overcome. They pursue me relentlessly. They manufacture accidental meetings. They find excuses to throw their daughters in my path at every opportunity." "That must be very difficult for you," Seren said dryly. He turned, one corner of his mouth twitching. "I don't expect sympathy, but I do want it to stop. A fiancé, even a pretend one, would accomplish that. No more matchmaking attempts. No more simpering debutantes batting their eyelashes in my direction. Peace, at last. And what do I receive in return for providing this peace?" "3 things." He held up one finger. "First, protection. As my fiancé, You will have the full weight of the Ravenmore name and fortune behind you. No one, not Lady Ashford, not anyone, will dare to move against you. A second finger. Second, financial assistance. Your family's debts will be paid. Your brother's education will be secured. Your parents will be able to live in comfort again. Seren's lungs seized. The offer was staggering. Everything her family needed, everything she had dreamed of providing for them, offered freely in exchange for, what? Pretending? And third, she managed. Third, his expression grew serious. When the arrangement ends, and it will end, after a suitable period, we will part ways amicably. A mutual decision. No scandal. No shame. You will emerge with your reputation not only intact, but enhanced. The woman who tamed the specter, who captured his attention and then chose to walk away. Society will worship you. It was too much. Too perfect. There had to be a catch. Why me? Seren demanded. There must be dozens of women who would accept this arrangement without question. Women with better connections, better prospects, women who would see it as an opportunity to trap me into actual marriage. The Duke cut her off. Women who would develop feelings and expect the pretense to become reality. Women whose families would pressure them to secure a permanent alliance with my title. And you think I wouldn't? I think you're too practical for romantic fantasies. His gaze held hers. I think you understand the value of a business arrangement. And I think you're too proud to accept anything you haven't earned. Seren felt a stirring of warmth in her chest. Whether it was offense or a strange kind of pleasure at being so thoroughly understood, she couldn't tell. You've known me for less than a day. I've observed you for an entire evening under extreme duress. That's worth more than months of polite conversation. She rose from her chair, needing suddenly to move, to think. This is insane. You're asking me to deceive all of London society. I'm asking you to play a role that will benefit us both. The deception is merely a means to an end. And if someone discovers the truth, they won't. Not if we're vigilant. He moved closer, and Seren felt her pulse quicken despite herself. We will need to be convincing, of course. Public appearances together. Private conversations that might be overheard. The usual courtship rituals. The usual courtship rituals, she repeated. You say that as if it's nothing. It is nothing. Play acting. Performance. His voice dropped. Unless you're afraid you can't manage it? The challenge in his tone sparked something in Seren. Pride, perhaps. Or simple stubbornness. I can manage anything I choose to manage, she said sharply. Can you? The Duke's eyes glinted. Prove it. How? By accepting my proposal. By walking out of this house as my fiancé and facing whatever comes next without flinching. He extended his hand, just as he had the night before. What do you say, Lady Seren? Shall we give London something to talk about? Seren looked at his hand, looked at the scar on his face, the intensity in his eyes, the opportunity he was offering her. She thought of her father's shame, her mother's bravery, her brother's future. She thought of Lavinia Ashford and the satisfied cruelty in her smile. I have conditions, she heard herself say. The Duke's eyebrow rose. Do you? If I'm going to do this, I want terms, written terms, everything you've promised, documented and witnessed. Reasonable. And I want honesty. If there's something I need to know, about you, about your past, about whatever it is that made you the way you are, I want to know it. No secrets that could blindside me later. A shadow crossed his face. Pain, perhaps, or something older and deeper. That's a significant request. It's a necessary one. If I'm tying my reputation to yours, I need to understand what I'm tying it to. A long silence stretched between them. Seren held her breath, certain she had pushed too far. Then the Duke nodded. Very well. Honesty, within reason. There are some things I cannot discuss, but I will tell you what I can. He extended his hand again. Do we have an agreement? Seren looked at him, really looked at him, and made her decision. We have an agreement. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and Seren felt an unspoken understanding pass between them. Not quite electricity, not quite recognition. Something in between. Then welcome to your engagement, Lady Seren, the Duke said. I hope you're ready for what comes next. What came next was Lady Whitcomb's spring garden party 2 days later. Seren had spent those intervening days in a whirlwind of preparation. The Duke, Theron, as she was now supposed to call him, though the name still felt strange on her tongue, had sent a modiste to the Whitmore townhouse with instructions to outfit his fiancée appropriately. The resulting wardrobe was more extensive than anything Seren had owned in years. Silk gowns, morning dresses, walking costumes, all in colors that complemented her coloring. She had protested the expense, but Theron had been immovable. You represent the Ravenmore name now, he had said, during one of their brief planning meetings. You will dress accordingly. The announcement of their engagement had been placed in the papers that morning. Seren had read it over breakfast, the formal words rendering their arrangement suddenly, alarmingly real. The Duke of Ravenmore is pleased to announce his engagement to Lady Seren Whitmore, daughter of Sir Edmund Whitmore. The wedding is planned for autumn. Her mother had wept. Her father had emerged from his study for the first time in weeks, looking at Seren with something that resembled hope. Oswin had simply raised his eyebrows and said, So we're really doing this then? Yes, they were really doing this. Now Seren stood at the entrance to the Whitcomb Gardens, her arm linked through Theron's, facing the cream of London society for the first time as his acknowledged fiancée. Breathe, Theron murmured, echoing his advice from the dance floor. They can smell fear. That's comforting. I'm not trying to be comforting. I'm trying to be accurate. His hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. The gesture appeared possessive, but his grip was oddly reassuring. Remember what we discussed. Stay close. Smile occasionally. And for heaven's sake, look at me as if I'm not completely insufferable. That might require significant acting ability. His lips twitched. Then it's fortunate I've heard you're a quick study. They descended into the gardens, and the whispers began immediately. Seren could hear them swirling around her, like leaves in a wind. Questions, speculation, disbelief. The Duke of Ravenmore engaged? To the Whitmore girl? The one whose father lost everything in that shipping scandal? She kept her chin high and her expression serene, drawing on reserves of composure she hadn't known she possessed. The garden party was in full swing. Guests scattered across manicured lawns, dotted with refreshment tables and seating areas. A string quartet played somewhere in the distance. The afternoon sun was warm, and everywhere Seren looked, she saw faces turning toward them with undisguised curiosity. The vultures are circling, Theron observed. Lady Millworth at 2 o'clock, approaching fast. She'll ask about the wedding date. I'll deflect. Before Seren could respond, a woman in peacock blue descended upon them with alarming speed. Your Grace, what delightful news! And this must be your lovely fiancé. Lady Millworth's eyes swept over Seren with barely concealed assessment. Lady Seren, isn't it? I don't believe we've been properly introduced. No, we haven't. Seren smiled warmly. A pleasure to meet you, Lady Millworth. The pleasure is mine, my dear. You must tell me. How did you and the Duke meet? I confess the announcement came as quite a surprise to everyone. Seren opened her mouth, but Theron spoke first. We met at the Royal Botanical Gardens, he said smoothly. Lady Seren was sketching rare specimens. We discovered we share an interest in natural philosophy. One conversation led to another, and he glanced at Seren with an expression that looked almost tender. Here we are. Lady Millworth's eyes widened. How charming. I had no idea you were an artist, Lady Seren. The Duke flatters me, Seren said, playing along. I dabble, nothing more. She's being modest. Theron's hand found the small of her back. Her botanical illustrations are remarkably detailed. I found myself quite captivated. The warmth in his voice was so convincing that Seren almost believed it herself. She remembered just in time that this was all performance. How romantic! Lady Millworth clasped her hands together. And the wedding? When can we expect the happy event? Autumn, Theron said. We prefer not to rush. Very sensible. Well, I won't keep you. I'm sure everyone is desperate to offer their congratulations. As Lady Millworth retreated, Seren let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. That wasn't so terrible, she admitted. That was the easy one. Millworth is a gossip, but she's harmless. Theron guided her deeper into the gardens. The real test will be Lady Ashford. Seren's stomach clenched. She's here. Of course she's here. Missing an opportunity to witness this spectacle? She wouldn't dream of it. As if summoned by his words, Lavinia Ashford appeared on the path ahead of them, flanked by Honoria and Perpetua. Her golden curls gleamed in the sunlight, and her rose-colored gown was clearly the most expensive dress at the party. Her smile, however, could have curdled milk. Your Grace, Lavinia purred, dropping into a curtsy. And Lady Seren. What an unexpected pleasure. Lady Ashford, Theron's voice had hardened. I wasn't aware you found anything about Lady Seren's company pleasurable. Lavinia's smile faltered. Whatever do you mean? I think you know precisely what I mean. He stepped forward, placing himself slightly between Seren and the other women. I heard about your little game at the Pemberton dinner. Quite creative, quite cruel. I'm sure I don't. Let me be absolutely clear. Theron's tone could have frozen water. Lady Seren is under my protection now. She will become my wife, and anyone at all, who attempts to harm her, humiliate her, or so much as look at her unkindly will answer to me personally. Do I make myself understood? The garden had gone silent around them. Other guests had stopped to watch, drawn by the tension crackling through the air. Lavinia had gone pale. Your Grace, I assure you, I'm not interested in your assurances. I'm interested in your compliance. Theron smiled, and it was the same predatory expression Seren remembered from the Pemberton dining room. Do we understand each other, Lady Ashford? For a tense, protracted silence, no one moved. Then Lavinia curtsied stiffly. Of course, Your Grace. I meant no offense. See that you don't cause any in future. He turned away, drawing Seren with him, leaving Lavinia and her companions frozen on the garden path. When they were safely out of earshot, Seren released a shaky breath. That was necessary. Theron's expression had returned to its usual reserve. She needed to understand that the game has changed. You're not prey anymore. No. Apparently, now I'm a duchess-to-be with a formidable fiancé who threatens people at garden parties. Do you object? Seren considered the question, remembered Lavinia's cruelty at the Pemberton dinner, the years of small humiliations and pointed exclusions, the casual destruction of her family's remaining dignity. No, she said in a low voice. I don't object at all. His features rearranged themselves into approval, or perhaps respect. Good. Then let's continue our performance. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of introductions and congratulations. Seren smiled until her face ached, answered the same questions dozens of times, and played the role of besotted fiancé with increasing confidence. By the time the sun began to sink toward the horizon, she felt almost comfortable in the part. Almost. "You did well today," Theron said as they prepared to leave. "Better than I expected." "Such high praise." "I don't offer praise lightly. Accept it graciously." Seren turned to face him. In the golden light of late afternoon, the harsh lines of his face had softened slightly. He looked younger, almost handsome, if one ignored the scar. Or perhaps because of it. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask. Whether I answer is another matter. The rumors about you, about Lady Constance, about what happened 10 years ago." She kept her eyes on his. "Are they true?" A shadow passed across his face. "Which parts? Did you kill Lord Hartington?" "Yes, in a fair duel, sanctioned by seconds on both sides. He insulted someone I cared about. I gave him the opportunity to retract. He refused. And Lady Constance? Your fiancée?" The silence stretched so long that Seren thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Constance died by her own hand, not because of anything I did or didn't do, but because of secrets I cannot share. Not yet." His gaze found hers. "I didn't kill her. I didn't drive her to kill herself. But I failed to save her, and that failure is something I will carry for the rest of my life." The honesty of it stunned her. She had expected deflection, or anger, or dismissal, not this raw admission of guilt and grief. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I shouldn't have asked." "You had every right to ask. We agreed on honesty." He straightened, the mask sliding back into place. "Now you know the worst of it. If you want to withdraw from our arrangement, I'll understand." Seren thought of the afternoon they'd just shared, the way he'd protected her from Lavinia, the conviction in his voice when he'd called her not prey anymore. Whatever had happened 10 years ago, the man standing before her was not a monster. Damaged, perhaps. Haunted, certainly. But not evil. "I don't want to withdraw," she said. "We have an agreement. I intend to honor it." His eyes betrayed a flash of emotion. Relief? Gratitude? Before she could identify it, it was gone. "Then I'll call for you tomorrow," he said. "We're attending the opera. Lady Pemberton has a box, and she's made it abundantly clear that our presence would be appreciated." The opera. Wonderful. You don't enjoy opera? I've never been. For the first time since she'd met him, the Duke of Ravenmore smiled. Not the predatory expression he'd shown Lavinia, but something genuine, something warm. It transformed his face entirely. "Then I look forward to introducing you to it," he said. "Until tomorrow, Lady Seren." He handed her into the waiting carriage, and as she settled into the seat, Seren felt a dangerous warmth stirring in her chest. She crushed it immediately. This was an arrangement, a performance, nothing more. If she started to believe otherwise, she was lost. The weeks that followed passed like water through fingers. Seren had expected the arrangement to feel like a performance, a role she played during social events before returning to her real life. Instead, she found the boundaries blurring in ways she hadn't anticipated. It started with small things. The opera had been revelatory. Theron had secured a private box, and Seren had spent 3 hours transported by music she had only ever heard described in books. During the second act, when the soprano's voice soared through a particularly devastating area, she felt tears gathering behind her eyes and hadn't bothered to hide them. When she glanced at Theron, expecting mockery or indifference, she found him watching her with an expression of quiet wonder. "You feel things deeply," he had said afterward. "You try to hide it, but you can't. Not really." Is that a criticism? It's an observation, and possibly a compliment. Then came the morning rides in Hyde Park. Theron had discovered she knew how to ride, but rarely had the opportunity, and had insisted she join him 3 times a week. They would set out early, before the fashionable hour when the park filled with society's elite, and ride through mist-shrouded paths in companionable silence. Except the silences never stayed silent for long. They talked about everything: philosophy and politics. Books they had loved, and books they had abandoned in frustration. His work in the House of Lords, where he championed reforms that most of his peers considered dangerously radical. Her secret love of mathematics, which she had taught herself from her brother's discarded textbooks. "You should have been a scholar," he said one morning, as they walked their horses along the Serpentine. "You have the mind for it. Women aren't scholars. Women aren't a lot of things, according to society. That doesn't make society right." She had looked at him then, really looked, and seen something she hadn't expected. Conviction. Genuine belief that the world could be different, should be different. "You're not what I expected," she admitted. "Neither are you." The dinners were harder to dismiss as mere performance. Theron had insisted she dine with him at Blackwood House at least twice a week, ostensibly to coordinate their public appearances and ensure their stories remained consistent. But the conversations that unfolded over those meals had nothing to do with strategy. He told her about his childhood, the father who had been demanding and distant, the mother who had died when he was 12, leaving him alone with a man who saw affection as weakness. He told her about Cambridge, where he had finally found intellectual equals, and about the friendships he had formed there, most of which had withered under the weight of his reputation. She told him about the years before the scandal, the happy chaos of the Whitmore household, when money had been plentiful and her parents had still laughed together. The first season that had seemed so full of promise. The suitors who had shown interest before her father's ruin drove them away. She told him about the shame, the way it had settled into her bones like a chronic illness, coloring everything she did and thought and felt. "You carry it like it's your fault," he observed one evening. "Your father made the mistakes. Why do you bear the burden?" "Because someone has to. And my father is already broken by guilt. My mother is holding the family together through sheer force of will. Oswin is too young to understand the full weight of it." She stared into her wine glass. "That leaves me. It shouldn't. Perhaps not. But it does." He had reached across the table then, his fingers brushing the back of her hand. The touch was brief, barely there, but it had sent sparks racing up her arm. "You're stronger than you know," he murmured, "and you deserve better than the life circumstances have forced upon you." Seren had pulled her hand away, afraid of what she might do if she didn't. "We should review next week's schedule," she had said, and hated the way her voice trembled. The vulnerability came unexpectedly. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon, and Seren had arrived at Blackwood House for their scheduled meeting to find Theron in the library, standing before the window with a glass of whiskey in his hand. His posture was rigid, his knuckles white around the glass. "Theron." He didn't turn. "The anniversary is tomorrow." Anniversary? 10 years since Constance died. Seren eased the door shut behind her. "I didn't know. No one does. I don't speak of it." He finally turned, and she saw the rawness in his eyes, the grief that he usually kept so buried. "But I find that I want to. With you." She moved to the chair nearest him and sat. "Then tell me." The story came slowly, painfully, like blood from a deep wound. Constance Ashworth had been everything Theron was not. Warm where he was guarded, open where he was reserved. She had laughed easily and loved freely, and when she had accepted his proposal, he had believed himself the luckiest man in England. But Constance had secrets, a childhood marked by traumas she had never fully disclosed, a darkness that lurked beneath her sunny exterior, emerging in moments of despair that she hid from everyone, including him. "I knew something was wrong," Theron said, his voice rough. "The last few weeks before she died, she was different, distant. I asked her repeatedly what was troubling her, but she always deflected, always smiled, and assured me everything was fine." "What happened?" "Lord Hartington happened." Theron's jaw tightened. He had known Constance before me, had courted her, in fact, before she chose me instead. He never forgave her for that rejection, and he certainly never forgave me. What did he do? He discovered her secrets, the traumas from her past, the things she had never told anyone, and he threatened to expose them publicly unless she ended our engagement. Theron's hand shook slightly as he raised his glass. She couldn't bear the thought of her past being dragged into the light. So he broke off, unable to continue. "The duel?" Seren said softly. "You killed him for what he did to her. I killed him because he destroyed her and felt no remorse, because he stood at her funeral with that satisfied smile, knowing he had gotten exactly what he wanted." Theron's eyes were haunted. "I gave him a chance to apologize, to show any sign of human decency." He laughed in my face. "And the rumors that followed?" "The rumors were Hartington's final revenge. He had friends, allies, people who believed his version of events. They spread stories that I had driven Constance to her death, that my coldness and cruelty had pushed her over the edge." He set down his glass with a heavy thud. "Eventually, I stopped trying to correct them. What was the point? She was still gone." Seren rose from her chair and crossed to where he stood. She didn't think about propriety or appropriate boundaries. She simply took his hand in both of hers and held it. "I'm sorry," she said, "for Constance, for what Hartington did, for the years you've spent carrying this alone." He looked down at their joined hands, his mask slipping entirely. "You're the first person I've told the full truth to. I'm honored you trusted me. It's more than trust." His voice dropped. "Seren, She saw it coming, saw the confession building in his eyes, felt the tension in his fingers, and she knew, with sudden clarity, that if he said what he was about to say, everything would change. "Don't," she whispered. "Please." "Not yet." He stopped, searched her face. "Why?" "Because I'm not sure what's real anymore. We've been playing these roles for weeks, and somewhere along the way, I've started to forget where the performance ends, and I begin." She released his hand, stepping back. "I need to know that what I'm feeling isn't just proximity and pretense. And if it's not pretense, then it will still be there when our arrangement ends. We agreed on a timeline. We're not even halfway through." Theron was silent for an extended interval. When he spoke, his voice was tightly controlled. "You're asking me to wait. I'm asking us both to be certain. You said you valued honesty. This is me being honest. I don't know my own heart right now. I can't give you an answer I might regret. And if I already know my heart, then time won't change that." She refused to look away. "Can you give me that?" The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, Theron nodded. "I can wait." "But Seren..." He caught her hand before she could move away, his grip gentle but firm. "I'm not a patient man, and what I feel isn't going to disappear simply because you need time to acknowledge it. I know." "Good. Then we understand each other." He released her, and Seren fled the library, with her blood rushing in her ears, and her walls beginning to crumble. The ball at Thornfield House was supposed to be a triumph. The remaining weeks of their arrangement had passed in an agonizing blur. Weeks of avoiding the subject they had both been dancing around, of pretending that nothing had changed even as everything changed. Seren had spent those weeks falling deeper into something she was desperate to name. Every conversation with Theron revealed new facets of his character. every shared laugh, every quiet moment, every accidental touch built upon the last until she could no longer deny the truth. She was in love with him. The realization had come gradually, then all at once. One morning she had woken with his name on her lips, the remnants of a dream she couldn't quite remember, but that had left her aching with longing. She had lain in her narrow bed in the Whitmore townhouse, still her home, though Theron had offered to relocate her family to something grander, and accepted what she could no longer deny. She loved Theron Vane, Duke of Ravenmore, the specter, the man she had agreed to pretend to love. And tonight, she was supposed to attend a ball with him and continue pretending that her feelings were merely performance. The Thornfield House ballroom blazed with the light of 1,000 candles. It was one of the grandest events of the season, and all of London society had gathered to see and be seen. Seren wore a gown of midnight blue silk that Theron had commissioned specifically for the occasion, and she knew she had never looked better. But as she descended into the crowd on Theron's arm, she felt only dread, because Theron was watching her with an intensity that made her breath falter. And she knew, with terrible certainty, that weeks of waiting had only strengthened whatever he felt. They danced. They made conversation with the endless parade of guests who sought their attention. They performed their roles flawlessly, the devoted couple everyone expected them to be. And then, during a pause in the dancing, Theron drew her onto the terrace. The night air was cool against her heated skin. Stars scattered across the dark sky, and the distant sounds of the orchestra drifted through the open doors. They were alone, hidden from view by the shadows of potted topiary. "Seren, please don't. I have to." He turned to face her, and in the moonlight his eyes were silver instead of gray. "You asked me to wait? I've waited. I've tried to give you the space you needed, but I can't pretend anymore. Theron, I love you." The words fell between them like stones into still water. "Not because of our arrangement, not because of proximity or convenience, or any of the excuses you've been constructing in your mind. I love you because you're brilliant and brave, and you see me in a way no one else ever has. You don't know that. You don't know what I feel. I know exactly what you feel. I see it every time you look at me, every time you lean into my touch without realizing you're doing it. Every time you laugh at something I've said and then catch yourself, as if happiness is something you don't deserve." Tears were burning behind her eyes. "That doesn't mean... It means everything." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Marry me. Not as part of our arrangement, not as a performance for society. Marry me because we belong together, because the thought of this ending makes me feel like I'm losing something I can't survive without." Everything she wanted was standing right in front of her. All she had to do was say yes. Instead, she heard herself say, "I can't." Theron went very still. "Why?" "Because I don't know if this is real." The tears spilled over, tracking hot down her cheeks. "I came into this arrangement desperate and broken. You offered me salvation. My family's debts are paid, my brother's future is secure, and my parents can hold their heads up again. How do I separate gratitude from love? How do I know I'm not just convincing myself to feel something because the alternative is too frightening? I'm not asking you to be certain. I'm asking you to take a chance. And what if I'm wrong? What if we marry and discover that what we felt was nothing but proximity and circumstance? You'll be trapped with a wife who doesn't truly love you, and I'll be the fortune hunter everyone suspected me of being from the start. You're not, aren't I?" Her voice broke. "My family was destitute. You offered wealth and protection. I accepted. Those are the facts. Theron, everything else is interpretation. He reached for her, but she stepped back. I need more time. I need space to think clearly. Away from you. Away from this. She wrapped her arms around herself. Let me finish the arrangement as we agreed. And then what? You'll have an answer? I'll have clarity. That's all I can promise. The pain in his eyes nearly undid her, but she held firm because she had to. Because marrying him without certainty would be worse than not marrying him at all. Very well. His voice had gone flat. You'll have your time. He turned and walked back into the ballroom without looking back. Seren stood alone on the terrace, the tears falling freely now, and wondered if she had just made the worst mistake of her life. 3 days later, disaster struck. Seren was taking tea with her mother when Oswin burst through the door, his face ashen. There's something in the papers, about the Duke, about you. He thrust the newspaper into her hands, and Seren felt the blood drain from her face as she read. Spector's engagement revealed as elaborate fraud society shocked to learn that the Duke of Ravenmore's much-discussed engagement to Lady Seren Whitmore is nothing more than a business arrangement. Sources close to the family confirmed that Lady Seren was paid handsomely to pose as the Duke's fiancée, with no intention of actual marriage. It was all a scheme, our source reveals. The Duke wanted to stop the matchmaking attempts, and Lady Seren needed money to save her family. They made a deal. There's no love story. There never was. The newspaper trembled in her hands. Who, she managed, who would have? But she already knew. There was only one person who hated them both enough to do this. Lavinia Ashford. There's more. Oswin's voice was grim. The source claims to have documentary proof. Letters discussing the financial arrangements. A written contract outlining the terms. That's unthinkable. We were vigilant. Were you? Her mother's face was pale, but her voice was steady. Seren, is it true? Was this engagement a fiction? Seren opened her mouth to deny it, but she couldn't. Not to her mother. Not anymore. It started as an arrangement, she admitted, but it became... She stopped, unable to finish. It became real. Marjorie finished softly. I wondered. The way you spoke about him. The way your face changed whenever his name was mentioned. It doesn't matter now. This will destroy us both. His reputation, my reputation, everything we've built. A knock at the door interrupted her. The maid appeared, looking flustered. My lady, there's a carriage outside. The Duke of Ravenmore is here. Seren's heart lurched. Send him away. I can't. He says he's not leaving without speaking to you. He says to tell you. The maid hesitated. He says to tell you that plans have changed. Theron stood in the cramped Whitmore drawing room like a wolf in a henhouse, too large and too dangerous for the modest surroundings. His face was thunderous, but when his eyes found Seren's, his expression softened. You've seen the papers. Yes. Lady Ashford found one of the copies of our agreement, a draft I had discarded. She must have bribed someone on my household staff. His jaw tightened. I've already dismissed the guilty party. That doesn't help us now. The story is out. Everyone knows. Everyone knows what Lady Ashford wants them to believe. He moved closer. We have a choice, Seren. We can let this destroy us. Let her win. Let everything we've built collapse. Or what? Or we make it real. His eyes burned into hers. Right now. Today. We get married before anyone can stop us. By the time society processes what's happened, we'll be husband and wife. The scandal of a false engagement becomes the romance of a secret love story. The narrative changes. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. He took her hands, and she didn't pull away. I know you wanted time. I know you have doubts. But time is the one thing we no longer have. The question isn't whether you're certain you love me. The question is whether you're willing to take the chance. Theron, tell me you feel nothing. Tell me these past weeks have meant nothing to you. Tell me that, and I'll walk out that door and face the scandal alone. His grip tightened. But if you can't say that, if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, then marry me. Today. Choose me, Seren. Choose us. Every argument she had made on the terrace, every fear about certainty and truth, and the difference between love and gratitude, swirled through her mind. But looking at him now, at the desperation and hope warring in his eyes, she realized something. She had been so afraid of making the wrong choice that she had nearly made no choice at all. So frightened of confusing gratitude for love that she had refused to acknowledge either. The truth was simpler than she had allowed it to be. I love you, she said. I've loved you for weeks. I was just too afraid to admit it. Theron's face transformed. Then say yes. Yes. The word came out certain, absolute. Yes, I'll marry you. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, there in her mother's modest drawing room, with Oswin making sounds of theatrical disgust and Marjorie weeping with joy. When they finally broke apart, struggling to catch their breath, Theron rested his forehead against hers. I have a special license. We can be married within the hour. An hour? Seren laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. I'm not even properly dressed. You're beautiful. You're always beautiful. He stepped back, keeping hold of her hand. Mrs. Whitmore, I apologize for the unconventional nature of this proposal. I hope you'll do us the honor of witnessing our marriage. Marjorie wiped her eyes. Try to stop me. Oswin? Her brother shrugged, a grin spreading across his face. I suppose someone has to make sure you actually go through with it. And so, on a rainy Thursday morning, Lady Seren Whitmore married Theron Vane, Duke of Ravenmore, in a small chapel, with only her family as witnesses. The carriage ride to Blackwood House passed in a blur of stolen glances and intertwined fingers. By the time they arrived at their residence, the afternoon had faded into evening. The wedding night came with unexpected tenderness. Seren had expected nerves. She had expected awkwardness, perhaps, or the strange formality that seemed to accompany so many aspects of aristocratic life. What she had not expected was the way Theron looked at her when they were finally alone, as if she were something precious beyond measure. We don't have to, he began. I know. She moved toward him, her pulse racing but her voice steady. But I want to. Their first night together was nothing like the clinical description Seren had overheard from married women at society events. It was tender and passionate and occasionally clumsy, punctuated by laughter when things didn't go quite as planned. Theron was patient and attentive, more concerned with her comfort than his own, and when they finally lay tangled together in the massive bed, Seren felt something settle in her chest. Peace. Real, genuine peace. Any regrets? Theron asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. Not a single one. The scandal will be ferocious. Lady Ashford will do everything in her power to paint us as frauds. Let her try. Seren propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. We're married now. Actually married. Whatever arrangement started this, it's not pretense anymore. No. He reached up to cup her face. It's not. In the morning, they would face society. They would weather the storm of gossip and speculation. They would prove, through their obvious devotion to each other, that whatever had started as a business arrangement had become something far more profound. But tonight, there was only this. The two of them, finally honest, finally certain, finally together. The scandal did not destroy them. If anything, it made them stronger. Society, it turned out, loved a redemption story. Within weeks, the narrative had shifted from fraudulent engagement to unexpected love story. The Duke of Ravenmore, so long painted as a monster, was suddenly recast as a man who had found love in the most unlikely of places. And Seren, the impoverished lady who had accepted an arrangement out of desperation, became the woman who had melted the specter's frozen heart. Lady Ashford's attempts to fuel the scandal backfired spectacularly. Her cruelty, once overlooked because of her beauty and wealth, was suddenly visible to all. The story of her dare at the Pemberton dinner emerged, along with other tales of her vicious behavior over the years. By the end of the season, she had become a social pariah, received nowhere, pitied by some and despised by others. Serene did not gloat, but she did not mourn either. Justice, Theron observed one evening, reading the latest gossip column about Lavinia's fall from grace. Poetic, wouldn't you say? I would say she brought it upon herself. You're too kind to her. I'm practical. She settled beside him on the library sofa, leaning into his warmth. Vengeance takes energy. I'd rather spend mine on more pleasant pursuits. Such as convincing my husband to put down his newspaper and pay attention to me. Theron set aside the paper with a smile that still made her heart skip. I'm always paying attention to you, even when you don't realize it. How comforting. I try. He kissed her then, and Seren wondered how she had ever convinced herself that what she felt for him might be anything other than love. 3 months after their hasty wedding, Theron presented her with a gift. It was a thick legal document, dense with formal language, and Seren frowned as she tried to parse its meaning. What is this? Insurance. He sat across from her in his study, his expression serious. That document establishes a trust in your name. Your family's debts are paid permanently. Oswin's education is funded through completion. Your parents will receive an annual income sufficient to live comfortably. And you, he paused, you have an independent fortune, yours alone. Not dependent on me, not tied to our marriage. Regardless of what happens between us, you will never be financially vulnerable again. Seren stared at him. Why? Because I never want you to wonder. He leaned forward, taking her hands. I never want you to ask yourself if you stayed with me because you had no other option. This gives you freedom. If you ever decide that marriage to me was a mistake, you can leave. You'll lose nothing. Theron, her voice cracked. I don't want to leave. I know, but I want you to know that you could. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I love you, Seren. And love shouldn't be a cage. It should be a choice, made freely, every single day. She threw her arms around him, the document crumpling between them. You extraordinary, wonderful man. I prefer devoted husband, but I'll accept wonderful. She laughed through her tears. I love you, hopelessly, completely. And not because of any arrangement or financial security. I love you because you're the best man I've ever known. He held her tight, his voice rough against her hair. I love you too, more than I knew I was capable of. They stayed like that for a prolonged embrace, wrapped in each other. Two people who had found something neither had expected to find. Something real, something lasting, something worth every moment of fear and doubt that had preceded it. 5 years later, the nursery at Ravenmore House, the family's country estate, echoed with the sound of childish laughter. Seren stood in the doorway, watching her husband attempt to negotiate with their 3-year-old daughter, Cressida, who had decided that her dolls required a tea party at precisely the moment she was supposed to be getting ready for bed. Cressy, darling, the dolls can have tea tomorrow. They want tea now? Cressida had inherited her father's stubbornness and her mother's intellect, a combination that was already proving formidable. Miss Penelope is very thirsty. Miss Penelope is made of porcelain. She doesn't get thirsty. She does, when I say she does. Theron looked up at Seren with an expression of helpless appeal. Your daughter is being unreasonable. She's only my daughter, when she's being difficult? Those are the rules, yes. Seren laughed and crossed to the nursery, scooping Cressida into her arms. What if Miss Penelope has her tea after you've had your bath and put on your nightgown? Would that be acceptable? Cressida considered this with the gravity of a diplomat negotiating a treaty. With biscuits? 1 biscuit. 2. 1.5. Deal. Cressida stuck out her tiny hand, and Seren shook it solemnly. Later, after their daughter was bathed and night-gowned and had presided over a severely abbreviated tea party for her dolls, Seren and Theron retreated to their private sitting room. The fire crackled cheerfully in the grate, and outside the windows, the countryside stretched dark and peaceful beneath the stars. She's going to be absolutely formidable when she's grown, Theron observed. She's already formidable. She gets it from you. Me? You're the one who taught her to negotiate. You're the one who taught her to never accept the first offer. He laughed, pulling her down onto the sofa beside him. Fair point. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the flames dance. Seren thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that humiliating dare at the Pemberton dinner to this moment of quiet contentment. Do you ever wonder, she said slowly, what would have happened if Lavinia hadn't sent me to sit beside you? I try not to. The thought of never finding you, Theron shook his head. It doesn't bear contemplating. We might never have met. Or we might have met some other way. At the botanical gardens, perhaps, arguing about plant specimens. You would have been insufferably arrogant. I would have been captivated by your intelligence and entirely unable to admit it. So nothing would have changed, really. Nothing important. He pressed a kiss to her temple. The path might have been different, but the destination would have been the same. You and me. This. Seren turned in his arms, looking up at the face that had once intimidated her, and now felt more like home than any place she had ever known. The scar was still there, a pale line across his brow, but she no longer saw a monster when she looked at him. She saw Theron, her husband, her partner, her love. No regrets? She asked, echoing his question from their wedding night. Never. He cupped her face in his hands. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Seren Vane, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that. That might take considerable effort. I'm a patient man. Since when? Since I met a woman worth waiting for. He kissed her then, deep and tender, and Seren thought about all the stories she had read as a girl. Fairy tales, where love conquered all, where happy endings were guaranteed, where the monster always turned out to be a prince in disguise. She had never believed those stories. Reality, she had learned, was far more complicated. But sometimes, just sometimes, reality surprised you. Sometimes, the dare that was meant to destroy you led you to the person you were meant to find. Sometimes, the most feared man in London turned out to be the kindest. And sometimes, if you were brave enough to take the chance, pretending to love someone became the most real thing you had ever known. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this journey. If this story made you laugh, cry, or believe in love all over again, please show your support by liking, commenting, subscribing, and sharing it with fellow lovers of historical romance. Your support keeps our storytelling corner alive and thriving. Stay tuned. Another emotional story is waiting for you at the end of this video. Click, listen, and let your heart be swept away once more. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for being here.